What would you do if the person who humiliated you needed your help? For 17-year-old Layla, the decision wasn't easy, but it would change her life and theirs forever. In a world divided by privilege and prejudice, one act of bravery proved that kindness has the power to break barriers. Watch this gripping story of redemption and courage that will leave you questioning what it truly means to rise above. The sun blazed over the small southern town of Bridgewood, its rays falling unevenly on neighborhoods divided by invisible yet unyielding lines. For 17-year-old Layla Carter, these boundaries were not just physical. They were deeply ingrained in the stares, whispers, and snide remarks she endured as a young black girl navigating a town where wealth and whiteness reigned supreme. Layla had always been used to keeping her head down. As the top student at Bridgewood High, she focused on her studies, determined to escape her circumstances and forge a better future. But one encounter threatened to shatter her quiet resilience. It happened during a local charity event held at the Bridgewood Country Club, a space where Layla had been hired to serve as waitstaff. She moved silently through the crowd of elites, balancing trays of sparkling drinks with precision. Her dark skin and plain black uniform stood in stark contrast to the dazzling gowns and tailored suits of the attendees. Among them was Carter Jennings III, a 19-year-old heir to the Jennings fortune. Handsome and arrogant, Carter thrived on his family's wealth and influence. That night, as Layla passed by his table, he smirked and muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Careful, don't trip. You might not be used to these floors." Laughter erupted from his friends, and Layla felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She didn't respond, clenching her jaw and walking away. But the sting of his words lingered long after the night was over. A week later, fate intervened in an unexpected way. Layla was walking home from her part-time job at the local diner when she heard a crash in the distance. She hurried toward the sound and found a sleek, silver sports car crumpled against a tree at the bend of a poorly lit road. Smoke billowed from the hood, and the driver was slumped over the wheel. It was Carter Jennings. For a moment, Layla froze. Memories of his cruel words at the country club flashed in her mind. She could have walked away, left him to deal with the consequences of his reckless driving. But Layla's heart wouldn't let her. "Hey, are you okay?" she shouted, rushing to the car. Carter groaned weakly, his face pale and blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The door was jammed, and Layla used all her strength to pry it open. She managed to unbuckle his seatbelt and pull him out, just as flames began licking the edges of the engine. With Carter's arm draped over her shoulder, she dragged him to safety, her breath coming in short gasps. They collapsed on the side of the road as sirens wailed in the distance. When Carter opened his eyes in the hospital later that night, the first thing he saw was Layla sitting in a chair by the window, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. You saved me," he croaked, his voice hoarse. Layla glanced at him, her gaze steady. "Yeah, I did. Someone had to." Carter swallowed hard, shame creeping over him. He remembered how he'd treated her, how he'd mocked her in front of his friends. "Why? After the way I treated you?" Layla shrugged, though her voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I'm not like you, Carter. I don't tear people down just to feel bigger." Her words hit him harder than the crash had. Carter stared at her, realizing for the first time how small his world had been, how blinded he was by his privilege and arrogance. In the weeks that followed, Carter tried to make amends. He showed up at Layla's diner, offering a heartfelt apology. At first, she was skeptical, unsure if he truly meant it. But over time, Carter's actions spoke louder than his words. He used his family's resources to fund scholarships for underprivileged students and worked to bridge the divide in Bridgewood, starting with his own circle of friends. As for Layla, she didn't need his gratitude or validation. She continued to excel in school, her dreams of attending college growing closer with each passing day. But she appreciated that her act of compassion had planted a seed of change, proving that even in a world stacked against her, she could rise above the hate and inspire others to do the same. Sometimes, Layla thought back to that night by the roadside and wondered what would have happened if she had chosen differently. But deep down, she knew that her strength wasn't in seeking revenge or validation. It was in staying true to herself, no matter the odds.